What is up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about a very popular topic, which is how to improve your aim on controller in Fortnite. A lot of controller players feel like they have the wrong settings, the wrong sensitivity, or they just don't have the right practice methods, or feel like the practice methods they're doing aren't helping them improve. So in today's video, I'll be solving all that, and I'll be giving you the best ways to improve your aim on controller super fast. Before we get into this video, be sure to drop a like on it if it helps you out, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to see more content just like this, and of course, it's always super appreciated if you could use code Teckoh in the item shop. It's 100% free for you, and it seriously does help me out a bunch. As always, a giant thank you to everyone who uses it. But with all that said, and without further ado, let's get into today's video. So what I want to start this video out with is going to be something very important, which is your settings and sensitivity. This is going to be some basic stuff you want to make sure you have right, so you have that foundation to improve upon with your aim. Obviously, if your dead zones or sensitivity or something like that are terrible, then you're not going to be able to get good aim regardless. So I want to get this out of the way to start. And the first thing I want to start off with is going to be dead zones. A lot of people are really concerned about what dead zone to use for their controller, but it's actually extremely simple. All you want to do here is you want to lower your dead zone all the way to the minimum setting. I think it's like 0.05 or something like that. And you want to play with that setting in creative and see if you have any stick drift. What I mean by stick drift is basically when you move your cursor, does it move more than you're actually doing? So if you have stick drift and you move your camera, then the camera is going to continue moving even after you bring your cursor back to the center. So if you lower your dead zone all the way and you still have stick drift, then you're going to want to raise your dead zone slightly. And if you don't have any stick drift, then you're good where you're at. Generally, a newer controller is going to have less stick drift than an older one. So if you've had your controller a while, you may need to repeat this process a little bit. And basically all you need to do is repeat this process going up with your dead zone, and you want to find the lowest dead zone where you don't have stick drift. This is going to make sure your controller is the most sensitive it can be to movement, but it's not sensitive to an extent where it causes issues. And you're going to want to do the same thing for both your look stick and your movement stick. Getting into our next topic, and this one is going to be linear versus exponential. This debate's been going on in the Fortnite community since basically the day they were introduced, and the difference between linear and exponential is very simple. With linear mode, your movement basically goes up a consistent amount as you move the stick. So as you move your controller stick further away from the center, it goes up the exact same amount according to how far you move it. And with exponential mode, your cursor moves exponentially faster the more you move away from the center of your stick. So if you move your stick just a little bit, it's barely going to do anything at all. But if you move your stick all the way, let's say you move it all the way to the right, then you're going to be spinning super fast. Whereas with linear, you'll be spinning a normal amount. So linear is equally sensitive the whole way, whereas with exponential, you can make your cursor super fast by moving your stick further. Now, when it comes to these settings, most people prefer linear as they feel like they can aim a little bit better with it, and it just feels a little bit more consistent when it comes to your mechanics and stuff. But there are some mechanical freaks that use exponential, so it's really going to be individual preference. Personally, I would recommend sticking with linear because it's just a more consistent mode. And in terms of having good aim, I think it's going to be the better choice for most people. But especially if you want to get some crazy mechanics and hit some big shotgun flicks and whatnot, then exponential might be your choice. It's really just going to depend on the individual. I'd say the majority of you guys should use linear, but if you try out exponential and you feel like it feels good, then give it a shot. And finally, guys, the last one here is going to be sensitivity, and this one is very simple. And really, for sensitivity on controller, I recommend using basic trial and error. You want to start off by choosing a sensitivity that seems good. It could be a pros, it could be your current sensitivity, or whatever sensitivity you want. And you want to play some creative or play a couple of matches, completely your choice. And you're going to adjust your sensitivity up or down depending on how you feel. And essentially, all you got to do is repeat this process over and over for a little bit until you find a sensitivity you can confidently build, edit, and aim with. Really, this is the simplest way to find a sensitivity on anything. There are other methods like the PSA method, for example, where you actually put it into a PSA method calculator. If you look at any of my sensitivity videos on the channel, then you'll find that PSA method calculator if you want to try it. I definitely recommend doing that if trial and error doesn't work, but for the majority of you guys, finding it through trial and error should be perfect. So with that said, guys, now that we've gone over most of our settings and sensitivity type stuff, for the next part of this video, I want to talk about some ways you can actually go in and improve your aim. Essentially, these are going to be our practice methods. For the practice methods, we're going to have 3 different maps, so let's get straight into them. The first map I'm going to be talking about here is going to be Raider 464's aim training map. This map has been around for I think around a year to a year and a half now, and it's one of the best aim training maps in the entire game. It's entirely single player. You don't have to find any other people to do it with. It's super easy to access, obviously, because it's a creative map. And the best thing here is that the bots that you fight against are going to simulate how real players move, so it's much more realistic than most of your aim trainers out there. Obviously, most of your aim trainers out there are going to use just static targets or moving targets or something like that. And although those are helpful, they don't really give the same stimulus as something like a simulated aim duel would. This map has 20 plus different scenarios ranging from shotgun flicks to AR tracking, SMGs, and much more. And the majority of these scenarios use the bots that move like real players, so it's really applicable to the real game. So this is one of the best aim trainers in my opinion, and something you should definitely toss into your routine. I'll go ahead and put up the code to Raiders aim training map on screen right now. Getting into our next map, and this one is going to be the Scavic Aim Trainer. Now, you've probably heard this name 1,000 times because it's actually been out since chapter 1. This is one of the OG aim training maps in Fortnite and is still one of the best to this day. Fundamentally, this map is very similar to Raiders map, but with different scenarios, and there's less of a focus on that aim duel type of style and more of a focus on the target style. As you can see on screen in the background footage, it has a ton of really useful scenarios. This map has a lot of really good scenarios that target things that I find controller players struggling with a lot. These include, for example, vertical tracking, flicking to targets like we were talking about earlier, and one of my personal favorites in this map is box fight orbs. This is basically where it puts you in a box fight and it randomly spawns an orb inside of a box, and you're meant to edit on it and go for an optimal peak. And this is super helpful because it helps you improve at editing on a target and getting an optimal peak. This is something a ton of controller players struggle with in box fights. A lot of controller players tend to struggle with getting that good edit and taking control of that fight and actually going for the peak on their opponent. So being able to make that edit and hit that shot is going to be super helpful for a lot of you guys. And keep in mind, there's a lot of other scenarios in this map that I haven't talked about. There's way too much to cover. Overall though, it's a fantastic map with a great variety of scenarios, so I definitely recommend you give it a shot. So with that said, I'll go ahead and put up the code of the Scavic Aim Trainer right now. And getting into our third and final practice map for this video, and this one is going to be a relatively new map, which is Martoz's Turtle Wars map. What a Turtle Wars map is essentially a big box fight with a ton of people where you're forced into close range engagements to improve your shotgun aim. The biggest thing that you want to focus on in this map is something very particular. You want to focus on lining up your shots and using something called trigger discipline. Trigger discipline basically means that instead of just going straight for the shot the instant you see your opponent like a lot of players do, you actually want to take a second to line up your shot and really take that extra quarter of a second or whatever it is to make sure that you hit a big headshot for a lot of damage. This is something that's incredibly important on controller and something that so many players miss out on. A lot of people kind of just see their opponent and they instantly go for the shot because obviously that makes the most sense, right? But really that doesn't make any sense if you end up hitting them for like 30 or 40 or something like that. So what you can do in this map is basically when you see your opponent, you want to take that extra split second to line up that shot, make sure you hit a big shot. And being able to do this both in creative and in the real game is going to be so helpful for you guys. I really can't understate how important this is. With that said, spending a good amount of time in this map is going to help you not only improve your overall box fighting and mechanics, but if you do it the way I described, it should help you improve your shotgun aim dramatically and help you hit those big shots much more consistently in real fights. Especially if you can take that trigger discipline type of mentality and apply that in your actual games, it's going to be incredibly helpful for you guys, so definitely keep that in mind. With that said, Martoz's Turtle Wars map is a fantastic map, so I'll put the code up on screen right now for it. With that said, guys, getting into the last part of this video, and I just have two super quick tips for you guys before we finish up. And the first tip that I have here is to aim train consistently, guys. One of the biggest mistakes that controller players make is they start aim training for a little bit and they make a little bit of progress, but they end up quitting after a while because they figure they're just naturally going to have good aim because of aim assist. A lot of controller players kind of take that and they use it as an excuse not to aim train and not to practice consistently, and they end up not having good aim. The fact of the matter is that aim training on controller is super important, and failing to stay consistent with it is a huge mistake. You want to make sure what you're doing is sustainable, so even if it's just like 10 minutes during your warm-up a couple times a week, spending some time to specifically focus on your aim is going to pay dividends long term. Obviously, this is super important for both keyboard and controller players that are trying to improve their aim, but I specifically talk about controller here because a lot of controller players tend to have this issue, even more so than keyboard. And finally, guys, the last thing I want to talk about real quick is a couple of guidelines that you can use for setting up a routine. Starting off, you may be wondering, all right, so you gave me 3 maps, how many of these should I use? Should I use 1? Should I use 2? Or should I use all 3 of them? And honestly, guys, it's going to depend on your own preference, but I recommend doing a combination of 2 or 3 of these. Obviously, there's really not much of a problem with only doing 1 map. The only issue is you won't get too much variety in. But if it's something like Raider's Aim Training map or the Scavic Aim Trainer, something that already has a lot of scenarios, then that could totally work. But generally, I'd say the more variety you can get, the better. In terms of timing, I recommend most people split their time mostly equally between close, mid, and long range. So you want to get a fairly equal amount of practice for each of these most of the time. But if you find yourself struggling with one particular area more, say you feel like you can't hit your shotgun shots at all and that's such a big issue for you, then maybe you would want to spend more time focusing on that particular area. So definitely feel free to emphasize it and put more time into it if you feel like something is holding you back more. And finally, guys, the actual amount of time that you do the routine for is totally up to you, and it's going to depend on your own preference and how much time you have available. So really figure out how much time you can sustainably put into this. But one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to make the mistake of going too hard out the gate, doing like an hour plus of aim training every single day and getting burnt out after a week. You want to do something sustainable that you can keep doing for a long time. So whether that's 10 minutes or an hour or anything in between, you just want to figure out what's best for you. But with all that said, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to improve your aim super fast on controller in Fortnite Chapter 4 Season 4. Overall, after watching this video, hopefully you have your settings and sensitivity down, you have some really good aim training maps that you can use, and finally, you know to keep it consistent and you know how to set up a proper routine. If you found this video helpful, then be sure to drop a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to see more content just like this in the future. I post a ton of tips and tricks videos, not only for controller, but for everybody, so be sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. And finally, guys, if you want to show some extra support, it's always appreciated if you could use code Teckoh in in the item shop. It's 100% free for you, and it seriously does help me out a bunch. As always, a giant thank you to everyone who uses it. But with all that said, guys, thank you all for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.